It was 12 p.m. and he woke up getting out of his bed. He felt weird and Peter slowly got up, putting the news on. The news reported that Kingpin was thrown in prison and that Daredevil had been sighted with a black costume Spider-Man. Peter didn't see anyone was home and he could see that he was on campus somehow. Harry was in class and Peter grabbed his clothes and he got out of bed. He looked to see that his Spider-Man costume was gone and that whatever he had on last night, it wasn't normal. Someone knocked on the door and Peter slowly got up, getting the door, and it was Matt Murdock. Peter asked if he could help him and Matt Murdock said that they were looking for eyewitnesses when Spider-Man pushed that girl off the ledge. Peter tried shutting the door, saying that he wasn't interested, but Matt used his cane, shoving it into the door. He demanded to come inside and he started walking around. Matt told Peter, saying that we met before and Peter couldn't place it. Peter said to Matt that he didn't have any info on Indy being pushed and he said that the twins probably tricked Spider-Man into committing the crime. Matt walked around the room asking questions, but Peter kept shooting them down, demanding him to leave. Matt apologized to Peter, and as he was about to shut the door, he said rooftop 10 o'clock, and Peter didn't understand that. He left the room, shutting the door, and Mary Jane walked into the house asking how he was doing. Peter opened the door and he looked both ways, but Matt was gone, almost like he vanished. Mary Jane said, "It's almost like you've been a ghost around here." Peter told MJ that he needed time to think things through and that he didn't know what was going on, and MJ said to Peter that she was happy that the cops caught that killer that killed his Uncle Ben. Peter sat down knowing that it's finally been done. He avenged his Uncle Ben the right way, and Peter smiled at MJ. Peter said that Spider-Man put him away last night, and MJ got mad, telling Peter that he shouldn't support Spider-Man. Even though what he did for him was a good thing, he still needs to apologize for what he did to Indy. Peter wanted Mary Jane to understand that it wasn't Spider-Man's fault, but he had no choices in this conversation. Peter thought that was going to be the last of Spider-Man. It started with him letting the robber go, to him finally putting him away in jail. It was finished and it was officially done. Mary Jane was about to walk out of the door and she told Peter that she would see him at Spider-Man's public apology tonight if he shows up. She shut the door and Peter started pacing around, knowing that the city needed to know the truth about what happened and how he was going to explain it. He had to do the right thing and he had to be responsible about it. Peter recreated his costume and he put it on, leaving. He opened the door and jumped out of the window. He could hear Indy talking on a microphone, calling Spider-Man out for what he did to her. Spider-Man crawled up a rooftop and his spider sense went off. Daredevil tried to kick him again, and Peter remembered what Matt said about the rooftop and 10 o'clock. Daredevil punched Spider-Man in the face and he tried to kick him, but Spider-Man caught the attack and kicked Daredevil in the gut. Daredevil was almost out of breath and he told Spider-Man that he believes him and that he was tracking the twins before. He didn't want to defend her, but he needed to so he could bring him back. Daredevil told Spider-Man that the crime has been up 40% since you left, and that without him, this city would be controlled by the Kingpin. Daredevil said to Spider-Man that all he's asking is for him to swing down there and convince Indy not to sue and take legal action. Spider-Man didn't want to go down there, but Daredevil was right, or Matt Murdock, whoever he was. Spider-Man asked Daredevil how he knew he was telling the truth, and Daredevil said that he has his powers and he knows who to believe. Peter apologized, telling Daredevil that the fight they had last night was out of control and that he picked up something from the river. Daredevil extended his hand and Spider-Man took it. Indy called out Spider-Man and Spider-Man looked in the distance and he looked back at Daredevil, but he was gone. Spider-Man swung down there and the press and crowd started booing at Spider-Man. People started throwing things at Spider-Man and Spider-Man looked to see that she was beaten badly from whatever happened to her, and Spider-Man said to her that he was truly sorry. He grabbed the microphone and he explained to the crowd that Spider-Man wasn't meant to hurt people. He said that he couldn't change the past even if he wanted to. Spider-Man told Indy that the costume he wears is to protect the city and he failed that day, but he told everyone that he wanted forgiveness and he wanted everybody to drop the charges against Spider-Man. Spider-Man explained that an important person was shot in his life, but that person told him to use his powers in a responsible manner and that he needed to be responsible by coming out here today and apologizing for what he did. Spider-Man said with great power must come great responsibility, and Indy agreed to drop all of the charges, and the people in the crowd were surprised and some of them started crying. The hero was back and forgiven by the city. Spider-Man walked to Indy and he gave her a hug, and Indy cried, and Spider-Man told her that he would try to get her through this and that he was truly sorry for what happened and for what the twins did to both of them. Spider-Man looked in the distance to see Matt Murdock and he smiled at Spider-Man. Spider-Man swung away as a TV broadcast explained that the city forgives Spider-Man, and Indy explained on the TV that it wasn't Spider-Man's fault, and she publicly forgave him for what happened. Back at ESU, Peter and Indy were on a date talking, and Matt Murdock walked up to them both, explaining to Indy that she made the right choice by helping Spider-Man, and with him, the city should be cleaned once again. He walked away saying that you did good, Parker, and Peter went to class with Indy, and Peter met up with Harry and Mary Jane. They were studying for their tests until a massive earthquake started going off. The ground was cracking and something was happening. Peter's spider sense went off and he got into his costume. He crawled up a wall on top of the ESU roof and he saw Daredevil. Spider-Man said to Daredevil he wasn't looking for sidekicks, and no offense to Daredevil, and Daredevil laughed, saying that he was going to say the same thing to him. Daredevil told Spider-Man that massive energy spikes were going off and that this is another reason why he needed him back. Spider-Man asked if this was all part of his plan, and Daredevil said that he was tracking one of the Kingpin's buyers, and that was Quentin Beck. Spider-Man told Daredevil that he's heard of the name before, and Daredevil explained that night that he went on dark mode was the night Quentin Beck got a hold of major technology. Daredevil said he's trying to open a gateway up. Spider-Man demanded how he knew of all this, and Daredevil said that he went there as Matt Murdock to write papers down for his tech in case any legal battles went along with what he was going to do. I went into his filing cabinet and looked at blueprints, and there was teleportation devices, things that Tony Stark and S.H.I.E.L.D. should really have. Spider-Man said if that was their guy, and green smoke went off in the air as someone came out of the smoke. Spider-Man used his web swinging into the smoke, but Daredevil yelled saying not to go in there. Spider-Man saw smoke everywhere and Daredevil was behind him. A man with a robot voice echoed, explaining that Mysterio was coming and nothing was going to stop his rule. Spider-Man said incoming and kicked Mysterio in the face. Spider-Man said, I'm going to call you Fishbowl, and Mysterio laughed, saying that he should call him the Master of Magic. I'm Mysterio, you fool, and Mysterio was punched in the face by Daredevil. Daredevil yelled, asking what he was doing, and he punched him again and again. Mysterio cried, yelling no, as his suit was damaged. Spider-Man webbed him up, and they revealed Mysterio was in fact the man himself, Quentin Beck. The Daily Bugle ended up getting pictures, and he was exposed. Daredevil told Spider-Man that he couldn't have done it without him, and he said he needed to return to his own town to stop crime, and they both shook hands. Spider-Man asked about the technology, but Daredevil said that it was all VFX, and that none of it was real. Daredevil would leave the building, and Spider-Man looked at the clock, seeing that it was already late and that he needed to get something to eat. Peter looked in the distance and saw Joe's Pizza. The police threw Quentin Beck in prison, and he demanded for a lawyer. He ended up calling Matt Murdock, and Matt Murdock ended up picking up the phone, and he told Quentin Beck that he couldn't help him anymore. Quentin Beck laughed, and he smashed the phone as he disappeared. He teleported back into the warehouse with the probe that he got from the ESU hallway. As all of his plans worked out, he opened a portal. It kept getting bigger and bigger, but the portal was stable. He located another portal that was opened, and Mysterio grabbed his costume on, seeing that he could go into another reality over 10 years into the past. He hacked the device and found another device giving signals. He started hacking into it, making the device go off balance. Mysterio looked to see that he was harnessing too much energy and that he could hear screaming coming from the other side of the portal. He opened the portal and out came Baron Mordo from the 1994 universe. He fell to the ground and used his powers on Mysterio. He started crushing his suit, but things were different. This wasn't his version of Mysterio. He let him go and Mysterio fell to the ground. The portal shut behind Baron Mordo, and Baron Mordo told Mysterio that he had to serve him and his master, and in time he was going to understand this, or he would die right here and right now. Just like what Baron Mordo did to his world's Mysterio, he convinced him to work for him. In return, he was going to have anything that he wanted under Dormammu's side. Mysterio opened the gateway up to summon back Baron Mordo's universe, and the portal extended as it was stable. Out walked the original 1994 Mysterio, and then he could see an alternate version of himself with Baron Mordo. Baron Mordo tried to use his powers against Mysterio, but they were blocked. Mysterio shot out a bolt of lightning at Baron Mordo, explaining that the multiverse was Mysterio's. Both Mysterios walked up to each other, looking into each other's eyes, and turned their heads around at Baron Mordo. He was on the ground stunned, and he was in pain. The 2003 Mysterio grabbed a gravity glove, using it on Baron Mordo, and he was thrown to the ground. Somewhere else, somewhere in another reality, somewhere in another time, Spider-Man, Venom, and Iron Man were fighting Carnage and Baron Mordo. Spider-Man turned the probe back on, reversing the gateway in time. time before Dormammu could enter into their reality. Carnage and Venom had been thrown into the portal, falling into eternal nothingness where time and space didn't matter. Portals were around them as lightning could be heard crackling in the sky. Carnage threw Venom into a bolt of lightning as he screamed in pain. The lightning crawled up his back, ripping the symbiote off of Eddie Brock. He fell into a portal, being saved, dropping into a river. Eddie crawled out of the river to find himself in a new reality. Things were different and he could see a TV screen, and it was huge. Spider-Man was being convicted of throwing someone off of a building. He went into an alleyway hearing screams, and he ran to see this alternate version of Peter Parker throwing the symbiote off of him. It flew off of him, falling into an alleyway on the ground. Eddie moved his hand as he bonded with the symbiote, screaming. He was finally back with the symbiote. Carnage was struck by lightning and the symbiote ripped off of him, and the Carnage symbiote was sent somewhere else, going into a portal. Scarlet Spider was trying to stop one of the Kingpin's crimes, but what came out was a symbiote bonding with Spider-Man, triggering the Spider-Carnage events. Spider-Man had finished eating his pizza at Joe's Pizza until something odd happened. He heard echoes of screams somewhere and Peter's spider sense went off. It was going crazy. He dropped his pizza as a girl screamed for Spider-Man. Spider-Man ran, jumping off of the building, saving the lady. She started crying, thanking Spider-Man, and she said that she felt like she was falling forever, and then looked around to see that the world was different. Spider-Man asked if she was okay, and the girl said, "I don't know." Another portal opened as screams were heard, and someone had crashed into a building rooftop. It was the original 1994 Spider-Man. He looked in the distance to see a giant TV screen, and he knew that Madam Web was right. He needed to find her, and he needed to fix all of this. He didn't have the interdimensional teleporter though. Peter was going to need to make one or find somebody that knew how to make one. He looked at a TV screen and saw a Daily Bugle report, and things weren't right. It said Spider-Man had returned, and Peter yelled Mary Jane's name, seeing another version of himself saving his Mary Jane. Peter heard something behind him saying, "You see us everywhere, even in your nightmares." Spider-Man did a backflip, landing it, and it was Venom. Venom turned around saying that he was going to enjoy this even more.